Hey folks, happy Friday and welcome to another Plan A conversation. So listen, my DMs and my emails have been blowing up from last week's guest, Dr. Fritz Gillette. Talk about aha moments. Talk about the level of just, I guess, even leveling up. So many people have asked me to be connected to him, and I know his email chain's been blowing up this week because he really gave us a word about being seen and literally understanding the definition of just being and allowing who you are naturally to be enough. And he shared his story. So I would suggest that you go back and listen to last week's podcast, again, with Dr. Fritz Gillette. And before I get into today's conversation, I have so many announcements to share with you guys. It seems like life has just been coming at me pretty fast. This week, I was at Google for my very first time speaking there. A good friend and colleague, Andrea Brown, head of industry for their sales department there, asked me to come because she felt that her team was lagging and really being able to have that space to feel seen and heard with the last year and a half that we've been experiencing. And so we had such a great time unpacking so much pathologies, unpacking a lot of hurt, a lot of unease that has been happening in both personal lives and, of course, helping them understand the connection between leveling up their personal aptitude in order to excel in the professional world. And so we went through a lot of really great exercises. And again, I'm so grateful that leaders like Andrea over at Google is taking this time to support their staff by any means necessary. People first in the business, people first. So congratulations to Andrea and her leadership on that. Last announcement before we get into the interview. Okay, so a couple of you all have noticed that at the end of the visual show, there is something that says Champagne Toast Media. And then in the intro, it kind of just sneaks in there and says a Champagne Toast Media production. And so I have not officially said this, but because you've asked, I want to make sure that the information is out there. I have started a new media and tech company, and it's called Champagne Toast Media, storytelling and tech products that celebrate human complexity. And so my show is now our first actual product from the production company. There'll be a couple of media announcements coming in the next couple of weeks where it'll be more of official announcement. But for those who are asking, that is where we are. Of course, Plan A is going strong. I am just creating one umbrella for the larger vision for where I want this work to go and where I feel called to be in this time. And speaking of calling in this world and being a connector of people and living purposefully, the gentleman that you are seeing, if you are joining us visually, is a brother from another mother, clearly, and a friend who I have just watched just literally set the standard for so many of us in terms of being vulnerable, in terms of being a leader, in terms of helping us better understand our spiritual affiliation while we're here on earth and what we're all called to do. He's been a leader in so many different capacities. And before I get into why he is here, let me first welcome Cedrick Bridgeforth. Welcome to the show, man. So good to see you.
Yeah, thank you, Clay. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to actually have you. And just for our audience too, especially our audio, Cedrick and I met through a mutual friend and colleague, one of my former bosses, actually, when I used to work for a mission-based agency, Dr. Larry Ray High Jr. And he said to me, you really need to be connected to Cedrick one day. And he made the introduction. And I've just been so impressed and blessed by this connection ever since. And so, Cedrick, before we get into your book and this incredible body of work, how would you define who you are? You have so many titles in the world. How do you define that for yourself?
Ooh, I think it's just I'm at this stage of the game, just a man trying to make his way in the world. I mean, my personal mission statement is doing good work with and for those trying to do good work.
I love that. And so where did this all begin? Did you just wake up and say, in your life, this is what I feel called to do? There clearly has been a path here. Where did this path sort of start and align for you to know that that was your work?
I think I figured it out in retrospect, just, serving in a variety of capacities within my family, within my friend circle, and then moving into the military, into college, and then into service within the community and within the church world. I was just like, there's a through line here, right? There's a through line. This has not just been about me attaining or achieving or being celebrated in some way. It hasn't even been about my leadership. It's really been about building those key relationships and occupying the space that I was called to occupy at any given time, but to do that in collaboration with other people who are like-minded sometimes, and sometimes people who were of a different mind, but ultimately, the value of doing good work for the benefit of other people was a through line that I was able to grab hold of in the midst of that.
And for you, the beginning part of that through line, what was your first professional career in life, and how did that get started?
My first professional career would probably be my military service. My 4 years I spent in the United States Air Force, aim high, a great way of life. And we would always add to it until you start living it, right? But that was a great 4 years for me. Right out of high school, served 4 years. It happened to be during the first Gulf War, which just kind of came toppling down about 3 weeks ago. So that's been a long venture. But I served those 4 years right out of high school. So that was my first professional job. Of course, I had jobs when I was in high school, but I would say that was the beginning of my professional career.
Right. And why the Air Force?
Well, there was this beautiful Sergeant, Tom McCrae, who came to my high school to present on behalf of all of the branches of the service on a recruitment expedition for the most part. But I just looked up. We were gathered there in my high school library, and all of the service folk were up there, but he was the one chosen to speak on behalf of all of them. He stood up. He had on a nice blue uniform, freshly, shaven. Everything looked manicured. And for the first time in my life, I found myself looking at someone that I wanted to be like. And so whatever it was he was doing, I wanted to do that. I didn't care what it was. And at that point, I don't think I really even knew. I didn't know what I was saying yes to other than what he represented. So I began a pursuit to become whatever he was.
Yeah. What was the Air Force like for you interpersonally and spiritually? Were you on a journey of discovering something higher than yourself? Like, I know that people connection was really important. What was that like for you?
Oh, the service was great. It ended up being a great experience for me right out of high school. Growing up, I was always told, you're going to make it, you're going to do well, you're going to go to college, all of that. But no one in my family had gone, and we didn't have any money, and nobody knew how to get me there. I just knew that one day I was going to go. And people always say, well, that's why you went in the Air Force. It was to get money for college. No, I went in the Air Force because I saw Tom McCrae, and I wanted to be Tom McCrae, right? That was totally divorced from this whole idea of one day you'll go to college. And so for me, I tell people that I don't feel like I was in the military in my 4 years in the Air Force. I felt like I had a really good government job in a safe, secure environment with people who were on a similar journey. Some people were married, some were not, some were older, had families and whatnot. But for me, it ended up being a great space to explore issues of identity within a controlled environment. It was a space where my basic needs were provided for, which wasn't much different from what I had left behind at home, but it was far from home. So it forced me to figure out life on my own.
Yeah, life on your own, and sort of unpacking that understanding of being able to discover identity and to work through that. What was that for you exactly?
Well, I I tell people that I landed in Cheyenne, Wyoming, of all places, at the right time, right place, with the right people around, and that's been a constant in my life: right place, right people, right time. And an openness too, I'll say, on my part. But I don't know that I had that language back then to say that I was open. But I was searching. I was seeking, space to land, trying to figure out what was life going to be like for me away from the rural South that had been my home. And I ended up assigned to a missile unit with Jim Lentz was my supervisor, sergeant. And he was in the process of figuring out how to divorce his wife because he was ready to embrace his full identity as a gay man, clearly not open and out, being a member of the Air Force at that time, because this was under the first Bush presidency. So there was no don't ask, don't tell. It was just don't say nothing and don't get caught. Right. And so,
right.
but through some very candid conversations with him, I was connected with a larger group of guys who were living that same existence. And they literally took me on a journey and they said, this is what this gay lifestyle is about. So they took me to the clubs, the after parties, the house parties, the bathhouse stuff, everything. And they said, you know, you need to experience this with people you know, love, and trust, and people who know, love, and trust you, so that you are never, ever caught off guard. So they exposed me to pretty much everything. And I count that a real gift that most people know nothing of. And so, yeah, so I got to explore with other people, which again connects with that larger, you know, with that through line, right? So it's the journey with others. Yeah.
And so was there any level of resistance or soul searching at that particular point with who you were before?
Oh, yeah, of course. I mean, I grew up in the church in the rural South, you know, my family very, you know, religious and other things all at the same time, but religion really at the fore, Christian in particular, at the fore of all of that. So I had all of that. Being gay is wrong on one side, but on the other side, I have this group of people who are prosperous in life and, you know, encouraging me, you know, to explore, and they're exposing me to things I've never seen, thought, or, you know, imagined existed in the world. So yeah, there was an instant tug of war. But what made it different, Clay, was that I already was involved in that struggle within myself, you know, throughout, you know, from early childhood on. But now I found myself in this struggle with other people. That's what made it different.
The community aspect of it all.
Correct.
Yeah.
So this wasn't just my own private Idaho moment. This was, you know, so now I'm doing this sort of out in the open with other people now. And so as much as they're welcoming, inviting, and encouraging me, you know, I'm still wrestling with, but wait, you know, I've been told that, you know, but I'm also being told you're okay. I'm also being told you get to choose. Also being told this is who you are. And on the other side, I'm being told those same things, but for very different reasons.
Wow, I love that, Cedrick. And I know so many people listening to this podcast is probably really embracing that as well. But what do you say to people who that is not their story? That is not the way in which, if they're struggling right now, they don't feel a sense of community. They don't have anyone they feel like that they can share this experiences with. What do you say to them in order to be able to sort of find that center of support that you had?
I think for me, it all goes back to this sense of hope, right? I never lost hope. That's another through line, right? So it's just hope. I may be hope limited, but I've never been hopeless, right? And there's a difference there. And for me, it was really, things started to settle out for me when I had that open exchange with my mom and said, hey, this is what it is. This is who I am, you know, and, you know, I wrote the 4-page letter and sealed it with a kiss, as the songwriters say, you know, and that set us on a whole new journey. So for me, this sense that there was someone in my corner, right? It wasn't everyone, but there was someone. And for me, it happened to be my mom. Right. It could have been a friend. It could have been a coworker. It could have been anyone else. But for me, thankfully, you know, it ended up being my mom. And I know so many of my friends and others don't have that reality. You know, we may have a circle of friends or a cluster of folk who support and affirm, but family does not. So I ended up with that. And so I translate that, you know, or try to help, you know, translate that for other people is really find that one person. Right. Don't worry about a whole community. You have to find that one person, you know, who can help you maintain hope as you figure it out.
Cedrick, I love that. This week during one of my corporate engagements, one of the young ladies in the group said that during the pandemic, she revealed to her family that she was queer, to use her language, and she was married to a woman. And her family divorced her, as she put it. And there was one person that she had, after all this was said and done, who stood in her corner. And to affirm and validate what you're just saying, she just said, if it wasn't for that one person who was there for me, losing my family in this regard would not have made this process as seamless. And she was just saying, sometimes life come at you really fast and hard. But if you can just find one person, there's always at least one person there to support you. And that's what I hear you saying right now.
Oh, most definitely. Most definitely. Yeah. That community begins with that one person. And I've said it 1,000 times, at least 1,000 times, that, my mama knows my story. And it really doesn't matter who else does or does not.
And I love that too, that you also started with you feeling hope for yourself. And so we oftentimes try to seek out these sense of validation and sense of community with other people. But sometimes we forget the most important part of being in community with ourselves and finding hope for ourselves before we seek that externally. It's just an added benefit, the external community, I think.
Oh, yeah. And for me, each of us, every person listening to this podcast or viewing it is experiencing hope right now, as I understand it. And for me, hope is simply the willingness to inhale and exhale, right? As long as you do not stop breathing, you still have hope that there is another moment. Now, you may be hope limited, right? In that you can't get past this very moment. But if you're willing to get past this very moment, then you get some more moments and more opportunities and more relationship and more experience. And then you're able to look back and say, wow, I was limited in that space, but I'm not in that space anymore.
Let me go ahead and pass the offertory plate. Where's the producer? We haven't even got into. I love this conversation. I'm really, really appreciating it. And I know the listeners are as well. And so, Cedrick, after Air Force is said and done, where does ministry come in? Was that like right after the Air Force? How did you make that transition, and what was happening for you?
Yeah, it was actually in the midst of my service in the Air Force that I, as the good old church folk would say, accepted my call to ministry. And we can unpack that, in some ways too, if we need to. But it was in that experience. Now, I'd grown up going to church when I was 9 or 10 years old. My grandmother, said, boy, one day you gonna preach. I screamed, ran out the church, was like, I don't want to do that, And so I found myself in the Air Force, while I was in the Air Force, worshiping at a church that was what they called, Bible centered. So I really started reading the Bible and studying the Bible, and found out I had this ability to make some meaning out of it with other people and for myself. And it didn't always sound like what everybody else had said. In fact, it sounded like something they had never read, so it was in the midst of that. And it was the communal affirmation over and over again of there's a gifting here that needs to be explored. And so I just came to a point where I opened myself up to that and said yes to it. I'll follow it. I'll see where it goes. And so it was while I was in the Air Force that I said yes to ministry. But what I also, in the midst of that, knew that I did not want to pastor a congregation. I did not want to preach every Sunday. I didn't want to visit people in the hospital. I didn't want to do all that stuff. So whatever I was saying yes to had its limitations. For me, it is yes, God, but, or yes, God, except, right? And so I created, my own list of what a call to ministry would be. And so after the Air Force, I moved back to Alabama, not knowing what my life was to be. I didn't have a job. I didn't have, a place scoped out to live. I had no plan except to remain open to what life would bring my way. And it brought some stuff. And so even by the time I entered college at the ripe old age of 24, I still wasn't clear what that calling was, but I was still saying yes to it. And again, through right place, right time, right relationships, was able to begin to explore what that might look like.
Okay, before you move on, so you did not know what the calling was, but you said yes to it.
I did. Yeah,
Okay,
I did.
break that down for our listeners. I don't think a lot of people are understanding what that means.
Yeah, there was just this inner knowing, this inner affirmation. One of the chapters in the book, I think, is the first chapter. Is the title is "Trust Your Gut," which is the way I think we would talk about that in the quote unquote real world. And regular folk, everybody else outside the church would talk about it in terms of that. But it's that inner voice, that's telling you, that's saying those things that you need to hear, and it's not necessarily what you would say to yourself. Right. And so really just getting to a space where I was open to hear that. And so what I've come to discover in retrospect, the way I can talk about this in retrospect, the being open to it was just really being open to fine tuning my understanding of who I was to be in the world. Now,
Wow.
I think we over spiritualize it in the church, and you got to call
Yes.
the ministry, and you got a spiritual gift, and you got to no. There's an openness to be who you were created and crafted to be in the world, right? And so,
Yeah.
so it was just that openness, right? And what that was going to look, I didn't know. I didn't know what it was going to look like. I knew what I did not want it to look like, but I did not know what shape it would manifest in.
And so for someone who's listening to this, would you advise them to, if they feel there is a sense of purpose, or it feels a sense of calling, not exactly sure what direction that is, but just open yourself up to the possibility of whatever that is for you?
Yeah, and explore, right? Try
Explore.
some things. Try
Yeah.
some things. And there's this synergy that happens when we find ourselves doing that thing or doing those things that I believe, created and called to do. Just like when we find ourselves in a relationship with someone and we know it's right. Like nobody has to tell us that. We just know it because of how it fits together, how it flows, right?
Yes.
And I think the same is true in the spiritual and the metaphysical. All of that. I think it all flows in the same way. There's just this settling in that comes when the yes is yes.
Yeah. And for you next, when did you settle into what your first, I guess, vocation would be in ministry?
Wow, I'm still waiting to do that, but but no, it's come in a variety of ways because when I entered seminary, my idea of what I was headed toward was to get a PhD and teach New Testament. That was going to be my expression of ministry. I knew exactly where I wanted to go. I knew exactly who I wanted to study with. I knew my dissertation topic. I was ready. I'd had my 2 years of Greek. I was ready to roll, right? And in my third year of seminary was placed into it was a pretty hefty internship, which involved me pastoring a congregation near downtown Los Angeles, a little church that was to be closed shortly thereafter. But I was to be there for a year just to, my supervisor said to babysit this until June. Well, I went there to babysit it till June. Well, whenever I had a babysitter, they made sure I was fed, I was clothed, I was safe. They told me what I needed to know to be a better person. They took care of me. So I went there and I did the things that I knew that babysitters would do, and it grew. And though I'd been accepted to a PhD program at the end of that year, I didn't feel like my work was done there. So I deferred a year and I continued in that role. And so that's why I say try some things, right? Try some things. And so I ended up in that appointment for 4 years, and we grew from a part-time position that had supplemental support to a full-time position where I had 2 associates, 2 support staff, helping to lead that before I left. And that was from some hard work, but I think it was also as a result of the yes, right? But even in that, it wasn't the pastoring a congregation, preaching every Sunday. That wasn't the thing that really gave me life. What gave me life was being with people who were trying to do good work, and me being able to use my gifts, my understanding, my experience, my education to help them do what they were trying to do. Right. I mean, so spaces where I've been able to do that are the places where I have flourished. And those are the opportunities I seek out.
Yeah, and those are opportunities that you seek out. And I think a part of it, especially for listeners, is figuring out where that yes lies and following that, but also then knowing when is it time to leave. In your experience, how did you know when it was time to transition and move on to the next thing? And what would be your advice to somebody who does not know when to leave a situation?
Oh, you got to learn to let go. Yeah, you got to learn to
Let it go.
Sometimes, we get comfortable, right? We get comfortable, and I don't think yes is about comfort. Yes has nothing to do with comfort. Those two things have very little to do with each other, right? I think there's some satisfaction. I think there's affirmation. I think there's growth. But comfort, I don't know that that's always a part of it, right? And sometimes the most difficult yes, is in the discomfort that we know the yes will bring. And so I always tell people, like when people are thinking about discerning, trying to figure out, do I need to take this job? Do I need to move over there? Do I need to date this person? Do I need to divorce this person? Do I need to imagine or reorder? Check your comfort level. Because there's something about growth that comes when we are uncomfortable, right?
Yeah.
There's a growth that comes out of this discomfort or when we are uncomfortable. So whenever I find myself too comfortable, I start looking, and I imagine, I realize that I need to get back to that open space. And every single time that has happened, Clay, an opportunity has come. And I've been able to say, this must be my yes, right? This must be my yes. And it may not be what I imagined, and it may not even go the way I pictured it.
Right.
But I believe the glory, the blessing, the benefit, the payoff is in the openness to say yes and to pursue whatever it is. And then we find our way. We don't find our way by staying in one spot. We find our way by moving out. And moving beyond.
Yeah, moving beyond. And as you're in this process of now leaving this congregation that you have built with the support of the community, what's next for you in your journey?
Yeah, I went off to to a theological institution and was a development officer as director of alumni and church relations, which put me in contact with denominational church leaders across the country, with academic institutions across the country. And it, again, put me in direct relationship with people who are trying to do good in the world, right? So again, that alignment came, after the yes. So I was able to do that for a number of years. And then I received an assignment to go back to lead a congregation. And so I went and did that for 5 years. And although that was not where I saw myself going, I was in a doctoral program. I was headed back to academia again. I was back to my original plan, my original goal of not pastoring anybody's church. But in the midst of that, this opportunity came. And it wasn't the opportunity that I had imagined for myself, but it was exactly the place I needed to be in that season, because then that opened up the door for the next thing that came.
Right. And so, Cedrick, you just said something that a lot of people struggle with, and that is being in alignment. I mean, whether we're talking about in Christian world, the wellness world, I mean, it is just the word that's thrown around, just like authenticity, and nobody really knows what it means. For you, what does alignment actually look like and feel like? How do we know that we are in alignment with our best good?
Yeah, for me, it really is something that has developed over time. So I have a life verse that I live by, Colossians 3:23, for those who are of the book. the newer part of it, at least. And, and it is loosely translated, whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as if working for the Lord and no one else. So that's my life verse. That's my mantra. So when I'm outside of the church circle, I just quote it as work at it with all your heart. Right. So that's my mantra, work at it with all your heart. So I'm clear about what I'm doing. I'm clear about who I'm doing it for and who I'm doing it with. So that stays out before me. In my doctoral program, one of the first things we had to do was develop a personal mission statement. Right. And it has morphed over time, but mine has always been about doing good work with others who are doing good and doing good work. It's always been some variation of that. And my values, are in alignment with that. And that's doing good. It's doing the right things. Doesn't mean I need to be right, but it means I need to be doing the right things. Right. And so for me, alignment comes when I'm clear about who I am, I'm clear about who I'm doing it for, and I'm clear about who I'm doing it with. And if it's not, in that vein, I may celebrate you, I may come to your thing, but I can't be a part of that thing, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So like a lot of clarity and intention seems to be, what you're saying.
Oh, exactly. And it's not something that comes from someone else, right? No one else can give me my guardrails. No one else can give me those buffers that keep me in line. That had to come out of who I am. I had to create those boundaries and those barriers, just like I am the one who must not just create them, but I must also manage them and manage myself within them, and not allow my disease to please, my need to be needed, and all that other stuff that gets in the way, ego, attainment, all that. Leave that stuff outside the bounds, right? But what's inside the bounds is knowing who I am, knowing who I'm doing it for, who I'm doing it with, and allowing that to really be the guide for the work that I do, for the relationships that I have, because then that helps me move from just having contact with people to being able to have impact in people's lives and in communities.
Yeah. And speaking of that impact and having a deep-seated level of an intention, this book, Alabama Grandson, if you were not in complete alignment with every single word, every single punctuation, everything was just so, I could tell as a reader, is so just well crafted and had a lot of intention behind it. For you, where did this book, what was it birthed out of? And how did you know it was time for you to put pen to paper?
Yeah, I don't know that I knew that it was time to really put pen to paper and publish a book, or to publish this book, but it was time for me to sit down and reflect on the sum total of my life as it has been, so that I can be even clearer about what it shall be. And so it was really that sort of clarifying moment. And in the midst of just doing some journaling and just writing, getting back into writing for my own self, for my own discipline and spirituality and other purposes for which I write, it was in doing that, this idea of, I'm going to write to my grandmother. She's deceased, but love her dearly. She still speaks into my heart and my soul almost on a daily basis. And, it's like, what would she think about this life that's been crafted for me, or that I have crafted for myself? What would she think about it? Right? Because she wasn't a woman of the world. Like, she didn't travel. She didn't have friends who lived in other parts of the county, let alone other parts of the country or the world. But, and here, I'm a product of her investment, and I'm on the other side of the country living in a world and a life that looks nothing like what she lived in. And so how could I introduce my current self to her? And in the midst of doing that, Clay, there were a couple things that happened. One, I started to list out some of the lessons that I had experienced, as of late, and quickly realized that those weren't lessons that I learned, in the last 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. Those were lessons that I was taught. in my early years, under her tutelage, and seeing that connection again, that through line blew my mind. It just totally blew my mind, and I began to just explore that. Like, what were those lessons? How were they taught? How did she live them out? And then what have I done with them, since then? So that's where it began. It just began as my own personal, spiritual, introspective exercise. And then I joined a meetup group because my therapist told me that I needed to join something. I needed to be a part of something where I had no possibility of being in charge. He says, you need to be in something where you are not leading it. You are only responsible for being.
Brilliant.
Yes. Because he said, you have a warped sense of how the world works because you are in leadership in everything you do. And I'd never thought about it that way. I just, I show up, somebody asks me to do something, I do what I'm asked to do, right? I mean, because first of all, I'm not going into a space that's not in alignment with who I am. So nobody's asking me to do something that's going to call me outside of who I am. And even if they did, I'm not going to do it, But, so his advice was for me to do that. And I signed up for this veteran support group, that he recommended. And that ended up playing itself out in a period not long after that, which we can talk about too. So that was one thing. Another thing was I joined this meetup group, and it was a writing group. And then COVID happened in the midst of this writing group, that I joined. And I said, well, I don't want to sit on Zoom for an hour and a half with people looking at the top of my head while I'm writing. So I'm just not going to go. But the person who orchestrated the meetup group was persistent in reaching out to me. Turns out she was Susan Shankin, and a publisher who asked for me to send, something that I was working on just so she could review it. And I sent one of the essays. And she read it, and we talked on the phone, and she said, there's something here that the world needs to see. And so that's how it became Alabama Grandson.
Can we talk again about alignment? Can we really talk about, Cedrick, you could not have orchestrated that to happen for yourself, but that whole concept about being open to the yes, being open to the possibilities, allow these acts of alignment to just happen in your life. And I really hope people who are listening can get that and receive it.
Oh, yeah. And sometimes, as I even reflect on my own story, I think sometimes it sounds a little like Forrest Gump, right? But it's really that openness. That's all I can attribute it to. It's being open to what's being offered, that has propelled me forward in each situation. And again, very little of it has played out the way I imagined it would. Very little of it, but yes. It has worked to further develop me. It has worked to help me gain a greater sense of self. It has given me platform to have voice and privilege, dare I say, in a lot of spaces. Hasn't been easy, but It's been worth it.
Yeah. And just speaking of what has not been easy, tell our listeners the full theme of the book and the process that you took in writing it.
Yeah. Well, the subtitle, A Black Gay Minister's Passage Out of Hiding, kind of pulls the veil back on some of that, right? Because I do serve as a spiritual leader within a well-recognized religious institution within this country, and one that is not fully affirming of who I am. Both as a Black man and as someone who identifies as gay, right? I mean, so that's just real. That's reality. But at the same time, that same institution has provided great opportunities for me to grow, to develop, and to help others to grow and develop and find voice and space and discover who they are. So I'm appreciative for it in that regard. But this reality that we need to have a public conversation about identity and voice and reclaiming and reshaping our own narratives so that others can do likewise is really what drove this for me. As I began working with the publishing team, they're like, this is a story that needs to be told because it's being lived, not just by you, but by other people who cannot yet tell this story, or people who have even lived beyond you who could not tell their story, right? So for me, my hope is that it's an opener for folks to be able to see that no matter where you were born, doesn't mean that's where you have to die. No matter what you were taught in school, doesn't mean that's all you ever get to know. No matter what religion or society or the government, labels you to be in a policy or in some practice, doesn't mean that's the sum total of who you are. So it's really claiming the power to shape my own narrative, to tell my own story, because I got to a point just a few years ago, right, where someone else stepped in and tried to tell a portion of my story that was not theirs to tell. But I gave them the power to do that because I had not told it, right? But now I have reclaimed that power and I've told my own story, and because it is mine to tell, right? It is mine to tell, and nobody made me do it. It's
right. And so many people, I think, get lost in this idea and the shuffle of having multiple identities. Someone recently asked me in a workshop, I feel like I have 5 personalities and identities. I'm one person at work. I'm one person in my spiritual community. I'm another, with my family. And I feel like there is no sense of connection. And even in conversation with him, I was asking him, well, what is your story? And he just said, no one's ever stopped to ask me that. What would you say to people who are trying to figure out how to get started with writing their story so they can have this liberating moment of expressing it for themselves?
Yeah. And the power for me, Clay, and I lost my own self in the last question, but, the power for me, was that as I started writing and this started to take shape as, what might be a manuscript, I finally got to a place in writing it to where I did not care if anyone ever read it, right? It was liberating for me to just get it out.
Wow.
It was liberating for me to get it out. And once I got it all out, then I could exhale, right? And I didn't care what happened after that. I didn't care if it was published. And once it was published, I wasn't vested, in how many it sold or whatever. But, but then it necessitates a whole nother thing once it is. But the internal knowing that I have opened up this space was freeing in and of itself. And so sitting down and typing, I am a gay, Black veteran who does not have a relationship with his father, who loves his mother dearly, has supportive siblings, have loved hard and have had my heart broken time and time again, who continues to live with secrets out in the open. And I want to change all that I can about myself and the world, period. Just sitting and writing that simple truth about myself was freeing. It was scary, but I could look at it and it's like, what do you mean gay? Like, where did that come from? Where did that label come from? Why do you wear it? Why do you claim it? And so writing about that was helpful for me to get clear about what I mean. And Black, what does that mean in the midst of all that Black folks and people of color have had to live with, since the beginning of time, but particularly in this last, couple of years when there's been more of a public acknowledgement and reckoning of the racial divides that exist within our policies and practices in this country. But what does that mean for me? Having been born in the rural South and now living on the, ultra liberal West Coast, what does that look like? To have served in the military, what does that mean to me now? right? What does that mean to me or mean for me right now? And so just breaking down my identities, listing those identities categorically, and then, talking, to myself about myself as to what that means to me and for me now. It was very helpful. And I would commend that to anybody.
Yes.
It may seem like a Sybil, kind of exercise, to list them out. But what it also has done for me, Clay, it's been, not only has it been freeing in the sense that it's been liberating, it's been empowering, because I've been able to look and see, yeah, I'm gay, I'm Black, but I'm also a man, right? So there's some privilege in that,
Right.
And so I've been able to look, and it's like, oh, I'm not only college educated, I have 3 degrees, right? There's some privilege in that. I'm Christian. There's some privilege in that. English is my first language. There's some privilege in that, right? And so now, once I go through all of those categorical identities, and I've been able to identify them for myself, and I'm able to see where I am privileged, even in my, overarching oppression, I'm able to see where I'm privileged, and then I can look at where I can use that privilege to do the good work with others who are trying to do good work.
Yeah, with others who are trying to do good work. Did your relationships with anybody in your close circle or community shift or change as a result of writing this truth out?
Not in any negative ways yet.
Right.
But
Positive, right? Yeah.
very positive, very, very positive. Nothing but affirmation. Not that I'm asking for anything other than affirmation. I thrive on affirmation. So let me put that out there. So keep it coming. Yes, please. And thank you. Right. But it's really been more, what's shown up in my inbox more than anything is thank you. I love you. That has shown up just over and over again. Right. And, so it's changed in that I think they've gone deeper, in that people, are saying, I had no idea. I've known you for 20 years, or I've known you for, 30 years, or we've worked very closely together. I never knew all of this about you, or I never knew you were carrying all of this, or I never knew you felt this way. And I thought we were really, really tight and really close,
Right.
but I feel like I have a greater sense of who you are after having read this book. So that has come through. And in some ways I celebrate that. It's like, great, now you have a greater sense, but I also lament the fact that I've been in such close proximity with folks who were open and caring and loving and compassionate, but I didn't feel the need to expose my whole truth to them for whatever reason. But in reality, in some spaces, it's like, I don't know that I really trusted you enough to give you that.
Wow. Mic drop. Wow.
Yeah.
So then what happens when, and this was a question that came up this week, is the interwoven thread in this talk is just so profound to me for so many different reasons. But then what happens when the sacred trust to share some of the most important truths of our human spiritual experience is not there? No one is providing that for us, and we still need to share that. And we don't feel that sense of psychological safety or being safe in these communities to share that. How do we then get it out? Because for a lot of folks, Cedrick, we're bottling these emotions up. We're not sharing anything. And then boom, life happens and there's a tragic event by our own hand, or there's a tragic level of depression that we can't just seem to shake. What do you say to people who are trying to find that sense of trust, but they don't feel it's there?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I think everybody needs a therapist. Everybody. I think everybody needs a therapist, especially the therapist. But I think everybody needs a therapist. Even if you only see them once a quarter, you need one that you know that you are going to see, right? There's something about knowing that you're going that I know for me, when I know I have that appointment, it's sort of like when I schedule my dental appointment, I floss more often, right? I floss more often, in those 2 weeks leading up to the dental appointment, I floss more often, and before the person who's coming to clean my house comes, I straighten up a little bit, Before I go to the car wash, I throw away some of the, straw paper and all the other stuff sitting around. I think it's a similar thing when, when we know we're going, right? When there's a knowing that we're going, it keeps us accountable, and I think helps to keep us in line, but also can keep us open enough to keep inhaling and exhaling, right? To keep moving, to get to that place where we can have that space to do that. And I don't really talk about safe space a whole lot. I've shifted more to thinking about this in terms, based on some reading I was doing a few years ago around brave space. Like, that really spoke to me, right? Because that's more about me. That's less about you and less about the others who are in the space, but that's about my accountability, my willingness, and the steps that I am willing to take. So I'm not counting on you to create safe space for me. I'm counting on me showing up and being brave in my own truth, right? And the chips will fall where they may. So one, I think everybody needs a therapist. Two, I think everybody needs that one person, just that one person who will just listen well and see us for who we are. Everybody needs that place where they can put their deepest, darkest, rock gut, as Ian Van Zandt says, truth, whatever it is, right? I mean, everybody needs that space. And without that, I don't know how you live, right? But between here and there, get a pen and paper and tell your own truth about yourself to yourself. Start there, because if you can't do that, that other person and that therapist cannot help you. They cannot help you. So I think those three things are really critical in moving from here toward there, whatever there may be.
Yeah. And before I let you go, Cedrick, what learning lesson from this book has been one of the most profound for you?
Ooh, well, they all just kind of weave together. But I think the one, chapter 5, learn to let go, that lesson. And if you look at the table of contents, whether you read the book or not is not really that important. But if you just look at the table of contents, you'll see that each chapter has a label, and that label is a lesson in and of itself. That could be an exercise for folks, who are trying to figure out how to get from here toward there. Is just look at those 7 titles and just take one and, like, what does that mean to you, and what's 1 or 2 things that you can do today or tomorrow to begin to live that out and incorporate that into your life. That could be an exercise to move from here toward there. But I would say learning to let go, because that has played itself out in the advocacy work that I've done, since very early in life, even my self-advocacy, that I've had to do, in advocacy that I've done on behalf of others, dealing with my, the other half of my DNA, and how that is or is not a factor within my current existence, with this tug of war that I do with the church, of being in, of being out, and being out in the midst of being in and out, learning to let go of those things, those people, those thoughts, those processes, I think has been the most helpful for me. And I'll end this answer with this part. I saw a bumper sticker not too long ago, and it read, "You do not have to believe everything you think." You do not have to believe everything you think. And so when I read that, of course, I grabbed my phone, I took a picture of it because I didn't want to forget it. And I put it on my board so that I don't forget it. But it ties back to this learning to let go, right? Because there are some thoughts that I have that if I don't let them go, I'll start to believe them. And if I start to believe them, they'll start to manifest themselves in my life. And it's just something I thought. It's not real. It's just something I thought.
And let the church say, amen. Cedrick, listen, you're going to have to come back and grace us with much more of your lived experiences and your wisdom, and definitely more with this book. So if folks are listening and they're viewing this podcast, where can we pick up your book? And also, where can we connect and learn more about you?
Yeah, the book is available on Amazon.com. The book is Alabama Grandson of Black Gay Minister's Passage Out of Hiding. So you can go to Amazon and get that Kindle, and also in paperback. You can always go to alabamagrandson.com or cedrickbridgeforth.com to connect with me, see engagements that are coming, or if you just want to chat it up, I'm definitely available to connect with folks. Because again, this is about the conversation.
Yeah. And speaking of conversations, Cedrick, listen, I am indebted to you for coming and sharing so much of yourself vulnerably with me, with the audience. I know these are kind of conversations they live for, that they thrive in. And when experts and people who just living life come and they take up space on this podcast, they invite so many other people to do the same. And so I thank you, brother. I say congratulations to you on all that you're doing. And I hope we can do this again.
Yeah, most definitely. Thank you for the opportunity, Clay. Thank you so much.
Yeah, for sure. All right, folks, of course, I'll have all of Cedrick's information at the base of this podcast in the show notes. You can learn more about me by visiting clayswilliam.com. And I'm on all of your favorite social media by the hashtag of @PlanA with Clay, @PlanA with Clay, folks. Remember, the Clay's with a K. Thanks for listening. I look forward to seeing you in our very next episode of Plan A Conversations. Peace, folks.